Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. One of my biggest frustrations when it comes to the security of the United States of America is the fact that a lot of the country just won't get serious about real security. And I thought for certain in the as we ended the summer of 2001 when the terrorist attacks happened on 9/11, I thought, well, certainly now America will get serious about addressing its borders and about national security. And, of course, the country has not. Case in point, the REAL ID Act and why it's so important to national security and why so many states seem to want to find ways around the law so that people don't have to comply with it. Michael Hethmon joins me now, who's a senior counsel at the Immigration Reform Law Institute. Michael, this frustrates me because I've got lots of different forms of ID, including a passport card and an enhanced driver's license. Why can't we get states in this country to actually comply with real ID and provide the country with some real security?
Well, that's a good question, Lars. Since the Real ID Act was passed back in 2005, the federal government, or Congress gave the federal government the option to grant these states extension in compliance,
right,
both with the technical security and stuff, and these extensions have dragged on and became almost routine under the Obama administration. There was a sea change in attitude toward this aspect of security with the current administration. And today we have, I think, some good news and some bad news. And the good news is that by October 2020, every state will be required to have a Real ID compliant driver's license in place, or the state licenses will not be allowed to use to board commercial aircraft, enter controlled federal facilities, or the third one a lot of people don't realize is have access to nuclear facilities.
Right.
And this hopefully will be sort of a historic milestone in our national security when we think about the situation going back to 9/11, when virtually all of the 9/11 attackers were able to obtain some kind of state driver's license or state ID, even though none of them were residents. Many were illegally present in the country, and all of them obviously were terrorists.
Well, I mean, Michael, there were famously 19 hijackers, but I think among them, didn't they have about 60-some different driver's licenses and pieces of ID? So they had multiple kinds of ID. They were a great poster case for how to get into a country and without any legal standing, obtain multiple kinds of ID so that you can go by multiple identities.
Right, and who could argue with the proposition that this needed to be dealt with? And Congress dealt with this, but they said, well, we're going to be respectful of states' rights, and we're not going to force this upon the states for constitutional reasons. We're simply going to set up federal standards. And they really, I don't think, believed that we would see the kind of massive resistance that we've seen in some parts of the country today. States were allowed to issue driver's licenses and IDs, what they call them non-compliant, which basically means provided to illegal aliens.
Right.
And as of today, 12 states in the District of Columbia still do that. So.
Well, and by the way, have you added in New York? Because New York State just decided to grant licenses to illegals, and the state of Oregon is voting on it, it seems, this week. So they're actually adding more. We're adding states that give licenses to people who are illegally in the country.
That's absolutely correct. And like all of the welfare reform and benefits measures that Congress has enacted going back to 1996, inexplicably they've all had loopholes in them that allowed the states to do this, and the loopholes in some cases are overcoming the law. What I think you picked up, and perhaps one of the reasons you called, was our institute. Besides litigating for citizens, we spend a lot of effort monitoring the vast federal regulatory apparatus.
Right.
And we issue respond to what are called public comments, which are an important opportunity for not only specialists and activists, but for ordinary citizens to comment on the administrative state, or some would call it the deep state. And any one of your listeners can go to regulations.gov and plug in Homeland Security, immigration, alien, whatever keyword they think is appropriate, and they will be able to see every one of these what they call notice and comment opportunities. And
right.
While our institute will issue technical briefs covering law and policy, you don't have to be an expert to let these agencies know what is going on. And certainly the Open Borders Lobby take advantage of this process in an organized sort of way. And what we noticed was a rather routine notice that said, the Department of Homeland Security, now that we're getting to the point where every state is required to be compliant, the law is also going to require us to start what's called a recertification process. Mm-hmm. In other words, they go in and audit and see whether states are really doing what they said they're doing, and it's going to be on a rolling basis every 3 years. And we looked at this and we said, rolling basis every 3 years, all 50 states, no matter whether they have, complied willingly and fully or have been dragging their feet to the last minute. What we proposed basically was that they should focus on, the so-called sanctuary states, yep, which would include those 12 now plus New York and possibly Oregon, in the District of Columbia, and should audit those programs closely, because every citizen, I'm sure, is aware. Millions and millions of us have had to go down and get our citizenship documents and ID documents and present them at some point to the Motor Vehicle Department to get our upgraded licenses. And this massive effort and process will, really go to naught if these states' compliance, especially the scofflaw states, is allowed to
Michael,
degrade.
I know that people are frustrated by this because they say, well, you mean I won't be able to use my driver's license to get on an airplane? And I hear that complaint more often than anything, more often than you hear I won't be able to go to the federal building, since most people don't go to the federal building very often, no matter where they live. And most people don't go to nuclear power plants very often, no matter where they live. But they're aware I won't be able to fly somewhere and see grandma or whatever. And it kills me that it would have been so easy to make it clear to Americans we want the country to be safe. Part of that is finding out whether people are in the country legally or not, and whether or not they have the proper ID that actually matches with who they are. I mean, I ended up doing a remote out of town the last night, and Monday night I had to check into a hotel. They wouldn't have let me check in without picture ID, but I can, there are states that say we don't even have secure picture ID. How much sense does that make? Michael, thanks for the work you do at the Immigration Reform Law Institute, and I appreciate you coming on the program.